My classmate's dad died shielding her from a steel beam in a car crash, so we took her in to help her grieve. 4 months later, I found her in my bedroom, wearing my clothes and cutting my hair off while I was duct taped to a chair. She'd been practicing my laugh in the mirror and calling my dad our dad at school. We were 4 weeks into the semester when my classmate Lorraine disappeared. Her dad had passed away 1 week ago. They got into a car crash, and in that final second when he realized there was nothing he could do, he unbuckled and threw his body over hers to protect her. She woke to find his head in her lap, a steel beam impaled through his skull, the beam that should have been through hers. She ended up returning 3 weeks later, and when she did, I found her behind the gym picking her cuticles bloody. I told her, I lost my mom 3 years ago. I know what it's like. She looked up with hollow eyes, and I couldn't leave her there. Later, at my house, she met my dad. Grief gets easier to carry, not lighter, he said gently. Her whole body unclenched like she'd been holding her breath since the accident. That first afternoon turned into a routine. Lorraine would walk home with me, settle at our kitchen table with calculus while dad cooked. He'd hum again, something he hadn't done since mom died. Setting 3 plates became automatic. A month in, she knew which drawer had the good pens, where we kept the glasses, but everything shifted at mini golf. Lorraine froze at the windmill hole, then dropped her putter sobbing. My dad and I played here. Dad rushed over, steadying her shaking shoulders. You're like another daughter to me, he said. You're always welcome here. Lorraine whispered, thank you, Dad, before catching herself. The way her face lit up saying that word made my stomach twist. Lorraine started small. I spotted her wearing my gray hoodie at school, the one with the paint stain. When I had plans, she'd show up anyway. I'd find her on our couch doing homework while Dad made her snacks. The way she'd settled into my usual spot made something tighten in my chest. Then came the moment everything cracked open. Ramona asked about weekend plans, and Lorraine answered first. Our dad is taking us to the movies. The words hit me like cold water. I watched her mouth form them so casually, like she'd been saying them her whole life. The cafeteria went quiet. Ramona's eyes darted between us. My face burned watching Lorraine not even notice her mistake. After school, I pulled her aside by the lockers. You need to stop calling him Dad. Her expression shifted into something frightening. Looking at her face, I realized I didn't know this person anymore. The Lorraine I'd befriended was gone. She seized my wrists, nails breaking skin. You don't understand! Spit hit my face as she screamed. You get a dad! Mine is rotting underground. The shove sent me crashing into metal. My skull rang. Dad appeared from nowhere, yanking her back while she fought him. My legs shook as I watched them struggle. When had she gotten so strong? Once he got her calm, he said quietly, Lorraine, I think we need a break from visits. Her face emptied. Then she smiled with nothing behind her eyes. Of course, family comes first. I knew something was wrong before I even reached our front door the next day. It stood unlocked. Dad never forgot to lock it. My skin prickled as I called out, silence. I pushed my bedroom door open and Lorraine lunged from behind it. My heart hammered so hard I thought it would burst through my chest. My own shampoo filled my nose as we hit the floor. She'd prepared for this. Duct tape sealed my mouth before I could scream. The rope came from my backpack, binding me to my desk chair while I thrashed. The rope bit into my skin. I could taste blood where I'd bitten my tongue fighting her. My purple Christmas sweater lay waiting on the bed. She stripped and put it on slowly, smoothing the fabric like something holy. At my mirror, she practiced my nervous laugh until goosebumps covered my arms. Each perfect imitation made bile rise in my throat. How long had she been rehearsing this? The voice coming from her mouth was mine. Hi, Dad. I'm home. Should we get Chinese? She'd been studying me. I couldn't stop staring at her hands touching my things, wearing my life like a costume. Scissors appeared from her pocket. She grabbed my hair and cut close to the scalp, holding each piece to her head to check the match. Then she knelt, tracing my face with her fingertips like reading a map. If you scream, I'll hurt your dad too. When I struggled harder, she drove the scissors into my side without blinking. The scissors went in with a wet sound that made me want to vomit. I felt the fabric stick to my skin as blood spread, hot and wrong. She returned to the mirror, copying how I tucked hair behind my ear, how I moved my hands while talking. Dad's car rumbled outside. Lorraine went rigid. He's not supposed to be here yet. Footsteps climbed the stairs. Time slowed down. I could see Dad taking in the scene, the blood, the scissors, his daughter becoming prey, his face drained white. Lorraine whirled with the red scissors. Don't come closer. She was trying to keep me away, but Dad had already launched himself at her. They slammed into my bookshelf. Books crashed around them. I rocked violently, tipping the chair sideways, inching forward, rope cutting deeper, tasting copper in my mouth from screaming against the tape. Dad wrestled her down. Call 911! I dialed with my nose. The paramedics arrived within minutes, their heavy boots thundering up our stairs. I watched them restrain Lorraine while she screamed my name in my voice, insisting she was the real daughter. The sound made my skin crawl. Dad kept his hand pressed against my wound, whispering that everything would be okay, while his fingers trembled against my ribs. They loaded me into the ambulance first. Through the small window, I saw Lorraine break free from the officer's grip and sprint toward our house. She made it 3 steps before they tackled her to our lawn. Even pinned down, she kept practicing my laugh. At the hospital, nurses cleaned the scissor wound while Dad paced the emergency room. The cut wasn't deep enough for stitches, just butterfly bandages and gauze. When the doctor asked what happened, Dad's voice cracked, explaining how his daughter's friend had snapped. I noticed he didn't mention the identity theft attempt. Neither did I. They kept Lorraine for psychiatric evaluation. Dad drove me home in silence, both of us jumping when we pulled into our driveway. The front door still hung open. We walked through our house together, checking every room, every closet. My bedroom looked like a crime scene. Blood on the carpet, rope still attached to my chair, my hair scattered across the floor like dead leaves. Dad helped me clean up. We scrubbed blood from the floorboards and gathered the pieces of my hair into a trash bag. He found more of my clothes in Lorraine's backpack. Items I hadn't even noticed were missing. My favorite jeans, the bracelet Mom gave me, even my old diary. She'd been collecting pieces of me for weeks. That night, Dad installed new locks on every door. I heard him testing each one multiple times, the click, click, click echoing through our quiet house. He moved his sleeping bag outside my bedroom door. Neither of us slept. School felt different without Lorraine. People whispered when I passed, creating stories about what happened. Ramona cornered me at lunch, desperate for details about the girl who'd called my dad our dad. I pushed my tray away and left without answering. The cafeteria felt too exposed, too many exits she could slip through. 3 days later, the hospital called. Lorraine had been released to her aunt's custody. Dad's face went gray when he hung up. We both knew knew her aunt lived 20 minutes away. He called in sick to work and drove me to school himself, watching until I walked through the front doors. During chemistry, I spotted movement outside the window. My heart stopped. Lorraine stood across the street, wearing my gray hoodie, the one with the paint stain. She waved with my bracelet glinting on her wrist. By the time I got the teacher's attention, she'd vanished. Dad picked me up early. We drove home in silence, both scanning the sidewalks. At dinner, he pushed food around his plate while I stared at the third chair, the one where she used to sit. The house felt different now, like she'd left invisible fingerprints on everything she'd touched. That night, I woke to find my bedroom window open. The curtains moved in the breeze, and I knew I'd locked it before bed. Dad found me sleeping on his floor the next morning, clutching Mom's old baseball bat. He took another day off work. We spent it installing security cameras, the kind that sent alerts to our phones. Every few hours, one would trigger from a bird or passing car, making us both freeze. Dad's boss called twice. I heard him explaining he had a family emergency, his voice tight with exhaustion. The next afternoon, walking home from school with Dad beside me, we found our front door unlocked again. This time, nothing looked disturbed, but the air smelled wrong, like her shampoo. Dad called the police while I checked every room. They found nothing, took notes, said to call if she showed up again. In my room that night, I discovered she'd been there. My purple Christmas sweater lay folded on my bed, washed and pressed. A note sat on top in handwriting that looked exactly like mine. Thanks for letting me borrow this. Love, your sister. Dad installed bars on my windows. I helped him drill the brackets, both of us pretending this was normal. He started sleeping in the hallway permanently, his back against my door. Some nights I heard him crying quietly, probably thinking about how Mom would have handled this. School became a minefield. I'd see flashes of my own clothes in the hallway, catch glimpses of familiar movement. Sometimes it was her. Sometimes my paranoia invented her. The guidance counselor pulled me aside, concerned about my dropping grades and jumpiness. I couldn't explain that I was being hunted by someone who wanted to wear my life. 2 weeks passed without incident. I wonder how long Lorraine was planning this before she actually tried it. Did losing her dad make her brain work differently, or was she always capable of something this scary? Dad started talking about therapy, about moving forward. Then I came home to find him in the kitchen with 2 cups of tea. His smile looked forced. Lorraine's aunt called. She wants to apologize. My blood turned cold. Dad held up his hand before I could speak. I said no, but she mentioned Lorraine's been asking about you. Says she's getting help, taking medication. He rubbed his face, looking older than I'd ever seen him. Her aunt seems nice. Overwhelmed, but nice. That night, I found Lorraine in our garage. She sat in Mom's old rocking chair, wearing my clothes again, humming the song Dad used to hum while cooking. The security cameras hadn't alerted us. She'd learned their blind spots. She smiled when she saw me, that empty smile from before. I've been practicing being you. Wanna see? Before I could run, she started reciting my class presentation from last week, word for word, with every gesture perfect. She'd been watching me at school too. I backed toward the door, but she stood quickly, blocking my path. Your dad likes me better as you, she said conversationally. I don't argue about curfew. I don't complain about his cooking. I'm the daughter he wishes he had. The garage door opened. Dad stood silhouetted against the house lights, taking in the scene. This time, he moved differently, slower, sadder. Lorraine, you need to leave. She tilted her head exactly like I did when confused. But I live here. She's the imposter. The conviction in her voice made me shiver. She truly believed it. Dad stepped between us. I'm calling your aunt. If you come back, I'm calling the police. His voice stayed gentle, which seemed to disturb her more than anger would have. Her face crumpled, the mask slipping. You said I was like a daughter to you, she whispered. Real tears this time, not performed ones. You said I was welcome here. You were, Dad said quietly. But you're sick, Lorraine. You need help I can't give you. She looked past him to me, and for a moment, I saw the girl I'd found behind the gym, lost, broken, drowning in grief so deep she'd tried to become someone else to escape it. Then her face hardened again. Fine, she said, walking past us. At the door, she turned back. But she'll never appreciate you like I do. We watched her disappear into the darkness. Dad locked the garage and pulled me into a hug that lasted until my shoulders stopped shaking. Neither of us mentioned that she still had my bracelet. The hug ended when Dad's phone buzzed. His aunt's number flashed on the screen. He answered while I watched Lorraine's silhouette fade into the street. Dad's jaw tightened as he listened. He hung up without speaking and guided me inside, locking the garage door behind us. In the kitchen, he explained that Lorraine had never made it back to her aunt's house. The woman sounded frantic, asking if we'd seen her. Dad had lied, protecting us both. We spent the rest of the evening reinforcing our home. I helped him check every window latch while he tested the new door sensors. Neither of us acknowledged that we were preparing for a siege. The next morning arrived too quickly. Dad insisted on driving me to school again, but his boss had called 3 times already. I could see the strain in his shoulders as he gripped the steering wheel. At the school entrance, he squeezed my hand and promised to pick me up immediately after last period. First period passed without incident. During second period, I noticed my backpack felt lighter. My math textbook was missing. I'd definitely packed it that morning. My hands shook as I searched through my bag, finding a folded piece of paper where the book should have been. The handwriting was mine, but the words weren't. You left this in our room. I put it back on your shelf. Your loving sister. I ran to the bathroom and locked myself in a stall, trying to control my breathing. She'd been in my house again, this morning, while we were there. The thought made my skin crawl. I splashed water on my face and forced myself back to class. At lunch, I sat alone in the library, too paranoid to eat in the cafeteria. Through the window, I spotted a familiar figure by the bike racks. Lorraine stood there, wearing my clothes, talking animatedly with a group of freshmen. They laughed at something she said, and she tucked her hair behind her ear exactly like I did. One of them called out a name I couldn't hear, and she responded naturally, as if it were hers. I texted Dad immediately. He replied that he was already on his way. I waited by the main office, watching the clock and the doors. When his car pulled up, I practically ran to it. We drove home in tense silence, both of us checking the mirrors constantly. Our house looked undisturbed from the outside. Dad went in first while I waited in the locked car. He emerged after several minutes and waved me in. Everything appeared normal, but the feeling of violation lingered. In my room, I found my math textbook on the shelf, exactly where she'd said it would be. That afternoon, Dad called a locksmith to install deadbolts that required keys from both sides. The man seemed puzzled by the request, but did the work without questions. While he drilled, I helped Dad set up motion sensors in the hallway. We were turning our home into a fortress. Dad's phone rang during dinner, his boss again. I watched him pace the kitchen, explaining that his daughter was having a crisis, that he needed needed more time. His voice cracked when he mentioned Mom, how he was all I had left. The conversation ended with Dad's shoulders sagging. He'd been given one more week before they'd have to reassess his position. I spent that night researching grief-induced psychosis on Dad's laptop. The articles described how trauma could fracture identity, how some people coped by trying to become someone else. One case study made my blood run cold. A teenager who'd convinced herself she was her dead best friend, going so far as to attempt to move in with a friend's family. The parallels were too clear. Morning brought new horror. I woke to find my window open again, despite the new locks. A neat pile of photographs sat on my desk. Pictures of me I'd never seen before, walking to school, sitting in class, eating lunch. In each one, Lorraine had circled my face with red marker and drawn herself in beside me. The last photo showed our house at night, my bedroom window glowing. She'd been watching us sleep. Dad called the police again. This time, they took it more seriously. An officer took the photos as evidence and promised increased patrols. But we both knew they couldn't watch us constantly. After they left, Dad made a decision. He pulled me out of school for the rest of the week. We spent those days together, rarely leaving each other's sight. Dad taught me basic self-defense moves in the living room, showing me how to break a grip, how to use my weight against someone stronger. His hands trembled as he demonstrated pressure points. Neither of us mentioned that he was teaching me to fight off a teenage girl. On the third day, Lorraine's aunt appeared at our door. Dad almost didn't open it, but she looked so distraught that he relented. She stood in our entryway, wringing her hands and apologizing profusely. She explained that Lorraine had been staying with friends, lying about her whereabouts. The aunt had only just discovered the truth. She pulled out a crumpled piece of paper, a journal entry in Lorraine's handwriting. My stomach churned as she read it aloud. Lorraine had written about becoming me, about how she deserved my life more than I did. She detailed our routines, my mannerisms, even the way I sneezed. The entry ended with a chilling line. When I'm her, I can pretend he saved me instead. The aunt broke down crying. She admitted she couldn't handle Lorraine, that she'd been looking into residential treatment facilities. But Lorraine was too smart, too manipulative. She'd convinced every therapist that she was making progress while secretly planning her next move. After the aunt left, Dad and I sat in heavy silence. We both understood now. Lorraine didn't just want my life. She wanted to erase her own trauma by living through mine. In her mind, if she became me, her father would still be alive, just transformed into mine. That night, I suggested something that made Dad's face darken. I wanted to use myself as bait, to draw her out and end this. He refused immediately, but I pressed on. We couldn't live like this forever. His job was on the line. My education was suffering. We were prisoners in our own home. The argument lasted hours. Finally, exhausted, Dad agreed to a compromise. We'd set a trap, but only with him present, only in a controlled environment. We spent the next day planning every detail. I posted on social media for the first time in weeks, announcing I'd be at the local park that Saturday afternoon, needing fresh air after everything that had happened. The post was public, visible to anyone watching my accounts. Within an hour, it had 3 likes. One was from an account with no profile picture, created just days ago. Saturday arrived gray and drizzling. Dad parked where he could see the entire park, while I sat on a bench near the playground, pretending to read. Every passing jogger made my pulse spike. Every child's laugh sounded like Lorraine's practiced imitation of mine. She appeared after 20 minutes, approaching from behind the restrooms. She wore my missing purple jacket and had styled her hair exactly like mine. From a distance, we could have been twins. She sat on the opposite end of the bench, mimicking my posture perfectly. We sat in silence for several minutes. I could hear her breathing, matching the rhythm to mine. When I shifted positions, she followed a hit later. The mimicry was so precise, it felt like looking at a delayed reflection. Finally, she spoke, her voice a perfect copy of mine. She told me she'd been practicing at other schools, introducing herself with my name, making friends who thought they knew me. Lorraine's been watching them sleep through the window. That detail makes me question how many nights she's been out there, just standing in the dark, watching their house. The dedication to this obsession runs deeper than just wanting a new family. She'd created entire relationships I'd never had, lived experiences that belonged to neither of us. I asked her why, though I already knew the answer. She explained in my voice how she could feel her father's arms around her when Dad hugged her, how she could pretend the accident never happened when she sat at our dinner table, how being me meant being saved instead of being the reason someone died. The confession hung between us like fog. I told her I understood the weight of that guilt, how it must feel to wake up every day knowing someone died for you. Her composure cracked slightly, real emotion bleeding through the performance. That's when she made her move. She pulled out a small knife, not threatening me, but holding it to her own wrist. She explained calmly that if she couldn't be me, she didn't want to be anyone. The manipulation was clear, but effective. If I called for help, if Dad intervened, she'd hurt herself and blame us. I had prepared for this. Instead of panicking, I pulled out my phone and showed her something I'd found. A video from her father's funeral, one her aunt had shared. In it, a man was speaking, Lorraine's uncle. He talked about his brother's love for his daughter, how he'd have made the same choice 1,000 times over, how his last act was the purest expression of love imaginable. Lorraine's mask shattered completely. She watched her uncle describe how her father had called her his miracle, his purpose, his greatest joy, how saving her wasn't a sacrifice, but a privilege. The knife fell from her fingers as real sobs broke through. Dad appeared then, having watched the entire exchange. He sat between us carefully, not touching either of us. He spoke quietly about survivor's guilt, about how Mom would have done the same for me, how that kind of love doesn't create debt, but freedom. He told Lorraine her father's gift wasn't meant to chain her to grief, but to free her to live fully. The 3 of us sat there as the rain started in earnest. Lorraine's sobs gradually subsided into exhausted silence. When she finally spoke again, it was in her own voice, hoarse and small. She admitted she was tired of pretending, tired of running from her own skin. Dad called her aunt while I sat with Lorraine. She didn't try to copy me anymore, just sat hunched and shaking. When the aunt arrived, Lorraine went willingly. Before getting in the car, she turned back and handed me my bracelet. Her fingers lingered on it for a moment before letting go. The aunt called the next day. Lorraine had checked herself into an adolescent psychiatric facility, asking for help. The intake counselor said it was the first time she'd used her real name in weeks. Dad and I listened to the update together, both feeling a mixture of relief and sadness. Over the following days, our house slowly returned to normal. Dad took down the extra locks but kept the security system. I returned to school to find rumors had spread, but Ramona Ramona intercepted anyone who tried to ask questions. She'd appointed herself my guardian, fierce and protective. Dad's boss granted him extended leave after he finally explained the full situation. We used the time to really talk, something we'd avoided since Mom died. He admitted he'd been so focused on moving forward that he'd never let us properly grieve together. We spent evenings looking through photo albums, sharing memories, crying without shame. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived addressed to me. Lorraine's handwriting, but steadier now. She wrote about her treatment, about learning to carry grief without drowning in it. She apologized without asking for forgiveness, acknowledged the fear she'd caused without minimizing it. The letter ended with a simple truth. She was learning to be herself again, even though it hurt. I wrote back carefully, with Dad reading over my shoulder. I told her about the girl I'd met behind the gym, the one who was hurting but still human. I said I hoped she could find that girl again and learn to love her. Dad added a note at the bottom, telling her that healing wasn't linear, but possible. School felt different now. I caught myself checking exits less, breathing easier. The guidance counselor noted my improvement, and my grades slowly recovered. Sometimes I'd see a girl with similar hair and freeze, but the panic passed quicker each time. Dad returned to work with a new perspective. He started coming home earlier, making dinner with intention rather than routine. He hummed again, but it sounded different now, less like trying to fill silence and more like genuine contentment. We ate at the table, just the two of us, no longer haunted by the empty third chair. One evening, while doing homework, I found one of Lorraine's practice sheets. She'd been copying my handwriting, filling pages with my name. Instead of throwing it away, I kept it as a reminder, not of the fear, but of how grief could twist love into something dangerous if left untended. The security cameras stayed up, but we stopped checking them obsessively. The motion sensors became background noise rather than constant alerts. Slowly, our fortress became a home again. Dad even started leaving windows open on warm nights, though he always checked my room before bed. Lorraine's aunt sent updates occasionally. Progress was slow, but real. Lorraine was participating in group therapy, making friends who knew her real name. She'd started art therapy and was processing her trauma through painting. The aunt included a photo of One Piece, a figure standing between two worlds, reaching toward the light. I stared at the painting in the photo for a long time. The figure reaching toward light looked exactly like the girl I'd found behind the gym months ago. My fingers traced the image on my phone screen, remembering how broken she'd been. The aunt's updates had become my weekly reminder that healing was possible, even from the deepest wounds. 3 months had passed since that day in the park. Dad and I had developed new routines, new ways of being a family of two that honored Mom's memory without drowning in it. He'd started teaching me to cook her recipes, passing down more than just ingredients. Each Sunday, we'd tackle a new dish together, filling the kitchen with familiar smells and new laughter. School had returned to normal, or as normal as it could be after everyone knew about the girl who'd tried to steal my life. Ramona had become my fiercest protector, walking me between classes and glaring down anyone who stared too long. Her loyalty meant everything, especially on the hard days when I'd catch myself looking over my shoulder. The security system remained active, but we'd removed the bars from my windows. Dad still checked the locks each night, a habit we'd both accepted as permanent. Some scars don't fade, they just become part of your landscape. We'd learned to live with vigilance without letting it consume us. One Tuesday afternoon, I was working on calculus at the kitchen table when Dad's phone rang. His face went still as he listened, then he handed it to me without a word. Lorraine's aunt's voice trembled through the speaker. Lorraine had left the facility, not escaped, but signed herself out against medical advice. She'd turned 18 the week before and had the legal right to leave. My hand shook as I gripped the phone. The aunt explained that Lorraine had seemed so much better, had convinced the staff she was ready. She'd been gone for 2 days before anyone thought to call us. The facility had notified the police, but without any crime committed, there was little they could do. Dad immediately called in sick for the next day. We spent the evening checking every lock, testing every sensor. Neither of us slept that night. I lay in bed listening to Dad pace the hallway, his footsteps a metronome of worry. By morning, we'd decided I'd stay home from school until we knew more. The first sign came that afternoon. Our mailbox contained a single envelope with my name written in Lorraine's handwriting. Dad wanted to call the police immediately, but I needed to know what it said. Inside was a photo of me taken recently, walking out of school. On the back, she'd written, "You look happy. I'm glad." We spent the next days in a state of hypervigilance. Dad drove me to school and picked me up, never leaving me alone. I caught glimpses of movement that might have been her, shadows that could have been anyone. The not knowing was worse than seeing her would have been. A week later, Ramona texted me during lunch. Someone matching Lorraine's description had been asking about me at the coffee shop where Ramona's sister worked. She'd wanted to know my schedule, my favorite drink, whether I still came in on Saturdays. Ramona's sister had told her nothing and called security, but Lorraine had vanished before they arrived. Dad and I had a long discussion that night. We couldn't live in fear forever, couldn't let her control our lives from the shadows. We decided to maintain our precautions, but try to return to some normalcy. He went back to work. I returned to my regular schedule. We kept our phones close and our awareness sharp. The next encounter came 2 weeks later. I was leaving the library after school when I saw her across the parking lot. She stood by the fence, wearing regular clothes, not mine. Her hair was its natural color again, no longer styled like mine. We locked eyes across the distance, and I saw something different in her face. Not the manic intensity from before, but something sadder, more lost. She raised her hand in a small wave, then turned and walked away. I stood frozen, watching her disappear around the corner. When I told Dad that evening, he wanted to call the police again. But what would we say? That she'd waved at me from a public sidewalk? That she'd looked sad? There was no crime in being near someone. The encounters continued sporadically. I'd see her at the grocery store, turning away when our eyes met. The way Lorraine signed herself out after turning 18 shows such careful planning. How long had she been counting down the days until she could legally leave? She'd be at the park when Dad and I went for walks, sitting alone on a bench, never approaching. Each time, she looked more like herself and less like me. The imitation had stopped, but the watching hadn't. Dad struggled with how to handle it. The police said without threatening behavior, there was nothing they could do. A restraining order required proof of danger, and standing in public spaces wasn't enough. We were trapped in a strange limbo, watched but not threatened, stalked but not harmed. One evening, I made a decision that Dad strongly opposed. I would confront her, but safely. We'd do it in a public place with Dad nearby and Ramona as backup. I needed to understand what she wanted, why she couldn't let go. The not knowing was eating at me. We chose the coffee shop where Ramona's sister worked. worked. It was always crowded, with good visibility and multiple exits. I posted on social media that I'd be studying there Saturday morning, knowing she'd see it. Dad would be at a nearby table. Ramona would be by the door. We had a plan. Saturday arrived bright and cold. I sat with my textbooks spread out, trying to look natural while my heart raced. Dad pretended to read a newspaper 2 tables away. Ramona chatted with her sister at the counter, eyes scanning the entrance. 20 minutes passed, 30. Then she walked in. Lorraine looked different, thinner, older somehow, though only months had passed. She wore her own clothes, her own style. She ordered a coffee with steady hands, then turned and saw me. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she walked over and stood beside my table, not sitting, just standing. I looked up at her, really looked. The manic energy was gone, replaced by something hollow. She set a small box on my table and stepped back. Inside was my bracelet, the one Mom had given me, polished and repaired where it had been damaged. Under it was a letter. She turned to leave, but I found myself standing. We faced each other in the middle of the busy coffee shop, 2 girls who'd been twisted together by grief and had to untangle alone. I saw Dad tense in my peripheral vision, ready to intervene, but Lorraine just nodded once, a goodbye without words, and walked out. The letter was long, pages of her processing what she'd done, why she'd done it. She wrote about the moment of the crash, how her father's last words were telling her he loved her, how she'd felt guilty for surviving, for being worth his sacrifice. She'd thought if she became someone else, she could escape that weight, but she'd learned that grief follows you no matter whose life you wear. She wrote about the facility, about facing her father's death without the cushion of delusion, about learning that love doesn't require repayment, that sacrifice is a gift, not a debt. She said she was leaving town, starting fresh somewhere where she could be herself, without the temptation of being someone else. The letter ended with an apology and a promise to stay away. Dad read it after me, his jaw tight. We sat in that coffee shop for a long time, processing. Ramona joined us, reading over my shoulder. The 3 of us formed a small circle of understanding in the busy cafe. Sometimes there's no clean resolution, no perfect ending. Sometimes people break and heal and move on, leaving echoes behind. We drove home in contemplative silence. The house felt different, knowing she was really gone. Dad made dinner while I did homework, both of us settling into our evening routine. The security system stayed on, but the urgency had faded. We'd probably always check locks more carefully, always notice when someone walked too close. But the active fear was over. That night, I found myself in my room looking at the bracelet she'd returned. Mom had given it to me for my 13th birthday, a simple silver chain with a small charm. Having it back felt like closing a circle. I put it on, feeling its familiar weight against my wrist. Dad knocked and came in, sitting on the edge of my bed like he used to when I was young. We talked about Lorraine, about grief, about how people can lose themselves trying to escape pain. He told me stories about Mom I'd never heard, about her own struggles with loss when her parents died, how she'd learned to carry grief with grace, to let it shape but not define her. I showed him the practice sheets I'd kept, where Lorraine had copied my handwriting over and over. We looked at them together, seeing the desperation in every repeated line. Dad suggested we burn them, let that chapter close completely, but I wanted to keep them, a reminder of how pain can twist love into something dangerous if left untended. The weeks that followed were quiet. No sightings, no letters, no signs of Lorraine. Her aunt called once to confirm she'd left the state, was staying with distant relatives and attending outpatient therapy. The relief in the woman's voice was palpable. She thanked us for not pressing charges, for understanding that Lorraine was sick, not evil. School continued its rhythm. Ramona remained protective, but less vigilant. My grades recovered fully, and I even joined the drama club, something I'd been too anxious to do before. There was freedom in facing your worst fear and surviving it. I'd learned I was stronger than I'd known. Dad and I grew closer through the experience. We talked more openly about Mom, about loss, about the future. He started dating again, tentatively, with my encouragement. Seeing him smile at his phone, making plans that didn't revolve around protecting me, felt like progress for us both. One afternoon, cleaning out my closet, I found the purple Christmas sweater. It had been washed and returned, but I'd never worn it again. I held it up, remembering that terrible day, how she'd put it on like a costume. After a moment, I folded it and put it in the donation box. Someone else could make new memories with it. The security cameras came down on the 6-month anniversary of Lorraine leaving. Dad and I made the decision together, acknowledging that we couldn't live in fortress mode forever. We kept the good locks and the motion sensor lights, reasonable precautions that didn't scream fear. The house felt lighter without the constant surveillance. I started volunteering at a grief support group for teens, sharing my story carefully, without names or identifying details. The facilitator said my experience helped others understand how grief can manifest in unexpected ways. I met kids who'd lost parents, siblings, friends. Each story was different, but the pain was familiar. Through the support group, I learned about complicated grief, about survivor's guilt, about the ways trauma can fracture identity. Understanding the psychology behind what happened helped me process it. Lorraine wasn't a monster. She was a broken girl who'd tried to escape her pain by becoming someone else. It didn't excuse what she'd done, but it made it comprehensible. Dad came to one session with me, talking about losing Mom, about raising a daughter alone. His vulnerability in that circle of strangers moved me deeply. We'd both been changed by loss, shaped by it, but not destroyed. We'd found ways to honor our grief without drowning in it. The 1-year mark approached with mixed emotions. Part of me wondered if Lorraine remembered the anniversary, if she marked it wherever she was. I hoped she'd found peace, had built a life that was truly hers. The girl who'd tried to steal my identity had been running from unbearable pain. I hoped she'd learn to face it instead. Dad suggested we do something to mark the day, to acknowledge how far we'd come. We decided on a hike to Mom's favorite spot, a hilltop overlooking the valley. We'd scattered her ashes there years ago, and it had become our place of remembrance and reflection. The morning was crisp and clear as we climbed the familiar trail. Dad carried the backpack with our lunch and water. I carried the practice sheets Lorraine had left behind. At the top, we sat on the bench someone had installed, looking out at the view Mom had loved. We talked about the past year, about Lorraine, about grief and healing. Dad told me he was proud of how I'd handled everything, how I'd chosen compassion, even in fear. I told him I'd learned it from him, from how he'd treated Lorraine with kindness, even as she spiraled into darkness. When we were ready, I took out the practice sheets. We'd brought a small metal container and matches. One by one, I fed the pages to the flames, watching Lorraine's desperate attempts to become me turn to ash. It felt like releasing both of us from that twisted connection. As the last page burned, I thought about about the girl behind the gym, about the broken bird I'd tried to help. Sometimes help isn't enough. Sometimes people have to save themselves. But the trying matters. The compassion counts, even when it goes wrong. We hiked back down as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Dad hummed the song he'd started humming again when Lorraine first came to dinner. The melody no longer sounded forced or sad, just part of who he was. We'd all been changed by our losses, but we'd learned to carry them with grace. That evening, we cooked Mom's lasagna recipe together, filling the house with familiar smells. We set 2 places at the table, no longer haunted by the third chair. Over dinner, we made plans for the future. Dad was up for a promotion at work. I was looking at colleges, thinking about majoring in psychology. Life was moving forward. After dinner, I sat at my desk, working on college essays. The prompt asked about a challenge I'd overcome. I wrote about learning to help without losing yourself, about the difference between compassion and self-destruction. I wrote about a girl who'd tried to escape grief by becoming someone else, and how I'd learned that the only way out is through. As I typed, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. My heart skipped, but it was just Ramona from her new phone, asking about weekend plans. The startle reflex would probably always be there, a small scar from those months of fear, but it no longer controlled me. I finished my essay and submitted it, feeling satisfied with how I'd told the story. Outside my window, the world was quiet and dark. Somewhere out there, Lorraine was living her own life, facing her own demons. I hoped she'd found peace. I hoped she'd learned to be herself. Dad knocked on my door to say goodnight, a ritual we'd maintained even as I'd grown older. We hugged, and I smelled the familiar scent of his aftershave mixed with coffee. He was my anchor, my constant, the person who'd stood between me and danger without hesitation. We'd protected each other through the worst year of our lives. As I got ready for bed, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. The girl looking back was different from the one Lorraine had tried to copy. Older, wiser, marked by experience but not broken by it. I'd learned that identity isn't something that can be stolen, only borrowed. Who we are lives deeper than clothes or mannerisms or practiced laughs. I turned off the lights and settled into bed, no longer checking the locks on my windows. The house was quiet, peaceful, in a way it hadn't been for so long. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new experiences, new chances to grow. But tonight, I was safe in my own skin, in my own life, in my own home. The last thing I thought about before sleep was that painting Lorraine had made in therapy. A figure standing between 2 worlds, reaching toward the light. We'd both been caught between worlds. She between life and death, me between compassion and self-preservation. But we'd each found our way to the light, even if our paths had diverged. In the end, that's all any of us can do. Reach toward whatever light we can find and hope it's enough to guide us home. Thanks for sticking with me while I poked around and asked way too many questions. Hopefully you click on another one of my videos.